Waking up felt like drowning. The world came back in pieces, sound first, sharp and metallic like clinking trays and distant beeping. Then came the weight, the paralyzing heaviness of my own body. My eyelids fought against the light, but eventually I opened them. The ceiling above me was white, sterile, unfamiliar. I didn't know where I was, only that my body ached in ways I didn't understand, and my tongue was dry like sandpaper. A nurse noticed. Her gasp was the first sign something wasn't right. She called for a doctor, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the call button. I couldn't speak, not yet. Couldn't ask the million questions clawing their way up my throat. But the alarm in her eyes settled something deep in my gut. This wasn't just a hospital stay. This was something worse. It took another day before I could form words. Another day before they told me I'd been in a coma for 6 weeks. The accident, my car, spun out near the cliffside, apparently. They said it was a miracle I'd survived, even more so that I'd woken up. But that wasn't the part that made the room tilt sideways. It was what came after, when I asked for my husband. Derek. The silence from the doctor was the first red flag. The way the nurse looked away was the second. But it was the doctor's voice, calm and clinical, that made my stomach drop. I'm sorry, Elena. Your husband, he believed you were gone. You were declared legally dead. I laughed. I actually laughed, dry and humorless. That's not possible. I'm right here. I understand how disorienting this is, the doctor said gently. There was a clerical error. Or, maybe not an error. I think you should talk to someone about this. A counselor. No, I snapped. I need to see him. Derek. Now. But Derek never came. Not that day. Not the next. Not the day after that. When I was finally strong enough to hold a phone, I searched him. There he was, smiling in a photo I'd never seen before, champagne flutes raised, his arm wrapped around someone I knew too well. Marissa. My cousin. The caption under the image read, "Congratulations to the happy couple, Derek and Marissa, newlyweds." I stared at the screen so long the edges blurred. I waited for it to make sense, for the words to rearrange into something less monstrous. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen Marissa. The last time she'd called. Visited. Grieved. Had she even cried? No one had told her I was alive, I realized. No one had told any of them. I had died. And the life I'd left behind hadn't paused. It had moved on without me. When I was finally alone that evening, I pulled out the 4 from my arm with shaking fingers. It burned, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed air. The hospital gown hung off my frame like a costume, a mockery of identity. I barely recognized my reflection in the mirror, pale, hollowed eyes, messy hair. A ghost. I looked like a ghost. It was late, but I found my way to the nurse's station while they were distracted, snagging my chart from the rolling cart. I didn't even know why. Maybe I thought seeing my own records would somehow ground me. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. A death certificate. Issued in my name. Dated 3 weeks after the accident. Signed. Filed. Final. I staggered back against the wall, my chest tightening. Derek had signed off on it. Declared me gone. Not even 2 months after the crash, he'd buried me on paper and moved on in flesh. And Marissa. Marissa, who had grown up beside me, spent summers sneaking my clothes, laughing over boys with me, telling secrets under blankets. She was in on it. She had to be. You don't marry your cousin's husband weeks after she dies by accident. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared out the hospital window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Every flicker felt like another betrayal. Another truth I had to face. They hadn't just grieved me and moved on. They'd erased me. Used my death. Replaced me. And I was supposed to stay gone. But I was here. Breathing. Alive. And the woman they thought was dead had just started remembering who she was. The next morning, I demanded clothes. No more hospital gowns. No more wires tethering me to the bed like a forgotten science experiment. I was done being compliant. I was done being the miracle patient. I needed to become Elena again, whoever that even was now. A kind nurse brought me donated clothes, soft with wear but a step closer to humanity. As I slipped them on, I caught sight of the death certificate again, still folded in my bag, tucked between pages of my medical chart like a cruel joke. I couldn't stop looking at it. The weight of that document clung to me, like invisible soil pressing in from all sides. Buried alive. That's what this was. Derek hadn't just signed me off, he'd buried me while my heart still beat. And the more I stared at the dates, the clearer it became. The death certificate was filed suspiciously fast. Less than a month after the crash. And the insurance? It had been processed within days of that. I could practically hear Derek's voice as he'd always said, "Elena, we need to plan for worst-case scenarios." I thought he'd meant wills, security, the future. Not this. I went back to the hospital records, needing more. I still had access to the electronic portal with my name, though apparently that name now belonged to a dead woman. It took only a few clicks. The screen displayed scanned documents, legal papers, claim forms. It was all there, like he'd never imagined I'd come back and see it. The life insurance policy had been maxed out. $1 million payout. And not to some vague estate either. Directly to Derek, my grieving husband. Signed, sealed, and processed all while I lay in that hospital bed, fighting through every breath, alone. The page wavered in front of me. Not from tears. I refused to give them that satisfaction, but from rage. Cold, deep rage that steadied my body with terrifying clarity. Derek had written me off for cash. That man, who'd once promised to protect me in sickness and in health, had looked at my broken body and seen a check. And Marisa, God, Marisa, how long had it taken her to slide into my place? I searched her name next, half hoping I was wrong. But no. I found them. Engagement photos, wedding registry posts with smiling selfies. A quiet courthouse wedding 3 weeks ago. No big announcement. No guests. No family. Just a marriage license and a smug little caption. Sometimes life gives you second chances in the most unexpected ways. I wanted to scream. The walls around me were too tight, too clean, too full of manufactured peace. I needed air. I needed the truth. I called the hospital administrator under the guise of reviewing my case. My voice was calm, chillingly so, as I requested full documentation for my file, including all visitors logged during my stay. There weren't many. Not a single visit from Derek after the second week. No Marissa, not even once. My supposed death certificate had been filed shortly after that. That was when I realized what they had done wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. I remembered things now, pieces slipping back into place like glass settling after a quake. The weeks leading up to the accident had been odd. I'd felt off dizzy spells, headaches, blurred vision. Derek had said it was stress, that I was overworked. He started bringing me drinks in the evening, insisting I relax. Told me not to worry about the strange taste. Said the bitterness was just the vitamins. God. Had he been drugging me? My hands trembled as I logged out of the portal. The doctor said I'd shown signs of medication interactions, unexplained toxins in my blood. I hadn't asked questions at the time, too busy trying to piece together the now. But now I was sure. Derek didn't just leave me for dead. He planned it. The car crash wasn't random. I remembered the last time I'd driven it, how the steering had felt off. The brakes had been slower. I told him about it. He'd waved me off. "I'll take it in," he'd said. Probably just the alignment. I'd believed him. Everything in me went still. Derek had tried to kill me. Not just abandon me. Not just erase me. He wanted me gone. And when the crash didn't finish the job, he played the long game, cut off care, denied visitors, let me rot in a hospital until they pulled the plug. Except they didn't. And now I was back and I knew. My hands curled into fists. I didn't have proof of sabotage yet. Not enough to walk into a police station. But I had a name. I had a body. I had a pulse. That was more than he'd counted on. They'd already buried me once. But now? I was ready to crawl out of the grave and drag them both into the light. I used to think love died slowly, fading like embers left too long in the cold. But that was before I looked back. Really looked back and realized the truth was darker. What Derek did to me wasn't a quiet undoing. It was deliberate. It was cruelty stitched into the fabric of my final days before the crash, masked as care, wrapped in rehearsed affection. The signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them. The memories came back in flashes now that I'd been jolted back into existence. I remembered the first wave of fatigue that settled in around late spring. I thought it was burnout. I was running a boutique, managing staff, juggling accounts. Derek told me I was too tense, that I worried too much. He started mixing my drinks at night, something he'd never done before. "Let me help you unwind," he said, handing me a glass of wine with that perfect smile. I thought it was sweet. God, I thought he was trying. But soon I felt foggy, like I was drifting through cotton. My memory began slipping names, appointments, simple words. At first, I laughed it off. But then I started blacking out entire conversations. Losing hours. Once, I woke up in the guest room, unsure how I got there. Derek told me I sleepwalked. He said he found me downstairs, barefoot, murmuring nonsense. "You scared me," he said, holding my hand. "You need rest." That was when I first asked him to take me to a doctor. He didn't. Instead, he told me I was just overwhelmed. That women, our age, go through these phases. Hormones. Anxiety. He even convinced me to stop taking my daily supplements, said they could be causing mood swings. I nodded along, trusting him. He was my husband. My partner. My person. But now I saw it clearly. He was creating the perfect alibi. Building a narrative of instability. Dismissing my symptoms as paranoia. No one questions the grieving widower when he says she hadn't been herself for months. He was crafting my disappearance before I even vanished. There was one night I couldn't shake, 2 weeks before the crash. I was sitting at the dining table, staring at a bowl of untouched soup he'd made. I remember how it smelled off, metallic. I pushed it aside, claiming I wasn't hungry. Derek didn't push, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. It wasn't concern. It was calculation. I didn't eat that night. The next morning, I woke up with tremors in my hands and a numb tongue. I should have gone to the hospital right then. Instead, I let him hold me and whisper that I was okay. And then, the crash. I remembered getting into the car. It was raining. Derek had kissed me goodbye that morning, oddly warm. Told me to drive safe. Said he'd pick up dinner. I remember the road being slick, the curve near the cliffside. I remember the brakes giving out, my hands jerking the wheel, the world flipping. Then nothing. Just blackness. After I woke from the coma, I'd assumed the accident was tragic. I clung to that word for comfort. Tragic. A horrible twist of fate. But the more I put the pieces together, the clearer it became. My car had gone in for repairs just 2 weeks prior. Derek took it in. He insisted. "I'll handle it," he said when I mentioned the brakes felt weird. And now? I'd bet every breath I had left that he never took it anywhere but the garage behind our house. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. I'd been a walking dollar sign with a countdown. And when I didn't die on impact, he left me to fade, alone, in a sterile hospital room while he played house with my cousin. I tried to think back to my last phone call with Marissa. She'd been distant. Flat. Said she was dealing with a lot. She never visited. Not once. And now I knew why. Guilt, maybe. Or fear I'd wake up and ruin everything. But what stung most wasn't that they betrayed me. It was that they stopped seeing me as human. I had become a variable to solve. An inconvenience to erase. I pulled out a journal the hospital therapist had given me, supposedly to help process my trauma. I hadn't written a single word until now. My hand shook as I opened to the first page and scrawled, "They tried to erase me." I remember now. Every lie. Every manipulation. I remember what they did to me. I set the pen down, heart pounding with a dangerous clarity. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make them regret every second they thought I wouldn't. I didn't tell the hospital I was leaving. I didn't want their concern or their questions. I signed the paperwork quietly, under a new name, a name borrowed from an old family friend, a name that didn't carry the weight of betrayal. As far as the world was concerned, Elena Whitmore was dead. And maybe she was, in a way. The woman I had been, the trusting, soft-spoken wife, had been buried long before the crush. What remained now was something colder, sharper, a ghost-wearing skin. The nurse offered me a ride to the shelter downtown, assuming I had nowhere else to go. I took it. I sat quietly in the back seat, my face turned to the window as the city unfolded around me like a stranger. It had changed. Or maybe I had. The buildings were taller, the streets more crowded, the people moving with a kind of detachment I now understood too well. The shelter was kind, clean, and full of women who carried secrets behind their eyes. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't tell them about the husband who sold my life for cash, or the cousin who smiled in my wedding photos and now wore my rings. I kept to myself. I used the public computer one night and looked up the cemetery records. It didn't take long. There it was. My grave. Section 9, Plot 114. A modest stone with my name, my birth date, and the date he chose for my death. July 3rd. I went the next morning. The sun was just rising when I slipped through the gates, hoodie pulled low over my forehead. No one paid attention to me. Why would they? I moved through the rows like a shadow, reading names I didn't know until I found my own. It stopped me cold. There it was. My name etched in gray marble. Elena Whitmore. Beloved wife. Gone too soon. I crouched down, fingers brushing the edge of the stone. There were fresh flowers in a vase beside it. Expensive ones. I lifted them, sniffed the stems. Derek's cologne clung faintly to the petals. He still came here. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was performance. But he had the nerve to visit the grave he created. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears were long gone. Standing over that grave, all I felt was a deep, visceral wrongness. I was breathing, and yet here I was, buried under a lie, mourned by people who never checked if I was really gone. No memorial service. No vigil. Just a quiet death and a quick wedding. The wind picked up, brushing my hair back from my face. I stared down at the name one last time and whispered, "You should have made sure I was dead." Then I stood and walked out. The next part took planning. I wasn't reckless. Revenge had to be methodical, clean, like surgery. I used library computers to find Derek and Marissa's new address. It was easy. They weren't hiding. They'd moved into a gated neighborhood on the edge of the city, funded no doubt by the insurance payout that came with my death. I memorized the security codes. I watched the house from a bench across the street. I saw them. Living. Laughing. Existing in my absence. Derek had grown a beard. Marissa wore the emerald earrings Derek gave me for our 5th anniversary. I watched them host parties. Drink wine on the porch. They smiled like people who believed they'd gotten away with something. I didn't feel jealousy. What I felt was a kind of calm fury. I wasn't going to confront them yet. No. That would be too easy. Too fast. They needed time to feel safe. They needed to believe I'd never return. So I vanished. I checked into a cheap motel under the same fake name and made myself invisible. I bought a cheap prepaid phone, created new email addresses, new accounts, a new identity. If they thought I was gone, I would make sure they never saw me coming. One night, I crept back to my old house, the one I once called home with Derek. The security code was still the same. I didn't go inside. I stood in the driveway, hidden in the shadows, and stared at the second-story window that used to be our bedroom. A silhouette passed across it. Marissa. My cousin. My blood. I wondered if she ever thought about me. If she ever woke up gasping from nightmares, imagining my eyes opening. Or if she slept peacefully, cocooned in silk sheets, the house reeking of my memory. I could have walked away. Disappeared. Started over in another state. But that would mean letting them win. Letting the liars keep the life they stole. No. I wasn't going to haunt them. I was going to expose them. They thought I was buried. But I had risen. And now I was watching. I had always believed the truth had a way of surfacing eventually. But what I never understood, what I now knew with bone-deep certainty, was that sometimes the truth needed to be dug out, clawed from the rotting heart of lies. Derek and Marissa hadn't just betrayed me. They had constructed an entire life atop the grave they shoved me into. And I was ready to rip it all down. I started with the financials. Derek had always been arrogant when it came to money. He thought I never paid attention. And maybe I hadn't, not until the end. But I remembered things. Passwords. Habits. He had a penchant for reusing codes, hiding things in plain sight. One night, in the flickering light of my motel room, I logged into an old shared account from a forgotten laptop I'd left at my parents' house before the crash. He hadn't changed a thing. Bank statements flowed like blood on the screen. Deposits from shell corporations, wire transfers that didn't add up, multiple offshore accounts. Derek had been laundering money long before I died. Thousands skimmed, shuffled, disguised. There were payments to someone labeled only as JM Holdings. I dug deeper and found out it didn't exist, at least, not in any legal way. And yet, money poured in and out, like clockwork. I cross-referenced the dates and noticed something else. The week after I went into a coma, 2 very large transfers had hit his account, one from the life insurance payout and another from this shell company. As if the crash had been a green light, a trigger for every hidden domino to fall into place. Derek had built this network with precision. I almost admired it. Almost. But what truly made my blood run cold was a folder buried in a shared cloud drive, one labeled Archive. Inside were photos. Screenshots of texts. Notes. A timeline. It wasn't just business records. It was a plan. My plan. Derek had documented everything. Drug dosages, the progression of my symptoms, even texts to Marissa that said things like, "She's getting worse, won't be long now, and keep your mouth shut. We're too close." My hands shook as I clicked through them, one by one, the bile rising in my throat. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't panic. This was murder in slow motion. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the screen. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because then, I found something else. An old contact I'd forgotten about. Aiden. Marissa's ex-boyfriend. He'd always been rough around the edges, charming in a dangerous, sharp sort of way. The kind of man who saw through things. He and Marissa had ended badly years ago after she cheated. With Derek, I now realized. I remembered how bitter he'd been. How his pride had cracked. I searched him next, half expecting he'd disappeared into some bar or moved out of state. But no, he was still here. Still local. Working as a private contractor. I found his profile easily enough, then found his number. I hesitated. Dragging someone else into this could complicate everything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Aiden might be exactly what I needed, someone who hated them as much as I did. So I called. He picked up after 2 rings. His voice was the same, gritty, low, skeptical. "Yeah? Aiden. It's Elena." Silence. "You're dead," he said flatly. "I was supposed to be." Another pause, then a low chuckle. "Guess the rumors were premature." "I need to talk to you," I said. "I know about Derek. About Marissa. I know everything." He didn't ask how I found him. Didn't question the impossible. Instead, he said, "Meet me tomorrow. Corner of 5th and Alcott. 10 a.m. Don't be late." When I saw him the next day, he looked the same. Rough jawline, dark hair, leather jacket like armor. He stared at me like I was an apparition, then broke into a half smile. "Damn. You really are alive." "Unfortunately," I muttered. I told him everything. Showed him the files. The texts. The grave. He didn't interrupt once. When I was done, he leaned back on the bench and let out a slow breath. "I always knew she was poison," he said. "Didn't know she'd go full Black Widow." "I need your help," I said. "You know how they operate. You know their blind spots." He looked at me, head tilted. "What's the plan?" "First, I want to break their life apart. Piece by piece. No warnings. No mercy." He grinned, eyes glinting. "Now that's the Elena I remember." I nodded, a cold steel settling in my spine. It was time to take back what was mine, one lie at a time. The first strike had to be surgical, clean, unexpected, and painful. And nothing would wound Marissa more than being used the way she'd once used me. If I could turn her into the weak link, the one who unraveled first, Derek would crumble not far behind. That was the thing about betrayal. It left people paranoid. And people who were paranoid? They made mistakes. Aiden was the weapon. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to whet his appetite. He didn't need much convincing. Marissa had left scars of her own on him. I just helped him remember how deep they went. When I showed him the wedding photos, her smug little smile tucked under Derek's arm, he said, "She always wanted to be queen." Time to remind her the crown doesn't fit. We started slow. Aiden ran into her, accidentally, of course, at the gym they both used. The same one Derek had funded after the insurance money cleared. Aiden played it cool, flashed that disarming grin of his, and kept the conversation surface level. Nothing suspicious. No questions. Just nostalgia, tension, the echo of a familiar spark. By the third run-in, she asked him to coffee. By the second coffee, she was touching his wrist when she laughed. By the end of the week, she'd let him kiss her. She was still married to Derek. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. I watched it all unfold from a distance, texts Aiden shared with me, photos from the cafe security cam I'd bribed the clerk to pull for me. Marissa had always wanted more. More love, more control, more attention. It was why she'd slept with my husband while I was still breathing. So I knew she'd fall for this trap the moment we baited it with the right flavor of validation. The affair reignited in secret, just like the first time. But this time I held the match. While Aiden distracted her, I worked on Derek's world from the inside. He had forgotten something very important, what I knew. The codes, the clients, the patterns. Derek used to vent to me after meetings, show me the spreadsheets, gloat about how clever he was. He thought I didn't understand the details. He was wrong. I had everything I needed to start dismantling the empire he thought he'd built on top of my bones. I sent anonymous tips to vendors he worked with, hinting at audit discrepancies. I leaked pieces of financial reports to competitors. Nothing that could be traced. Just enough to light tiny fires all around him, small enough to confuse, large enough to distract. And while he ran around trying to extinguish them, Aiden got Marissa into bed again. He filmed it. It was almost too easy. She invited him to the new condo while Derek was out at a conference. Aiden used a hidden camera pen I'd given him, left running on the nightstand. She was careless. Loud. And by the end of it, she whispered things into his shoulder that made my stomach turn. "I never loved him the way I loved you," she said. Derek was just convenient. Just convenient. The same man she helped try to kill me for. I wasn't sure if I hated her more for being vile or for being so easily manipulated. But the video was enough. Enough to humiliate, to threaten, to break them apart if I chose to release it. I didn't send it out yet. I saved it. Labeled the file, strike one. Let them have their stolen love for a little while longer. Let them drink wine in their kitchen and think they're safe. Because the next time they looked up, it wouldn't just be suspicion in the air. It would be me. But the part one hadn't expected, the part that caught me off guard, was how much I felt nothing watching it all. No heartbreak. No ache. Just cold calculation. Like I'd been replaced not just in their lives, but in my own skin. I wasn't Elena the victim anymore. I wasn't the wife. I wasn't even the woman who had once loved them. I was the consequence. Aiden, for his part, was having fun. Maybe too much. After our latest meeting, coffee at a diner off the freeway, he leaned back in the booth and said, "You know, if we weren't doing this for revenge, I'd almost call it a date." I met his eyes steady. "Don't get confused." He smirked. "Just saying. You wear rage well." I didn't smile. I didn't have to. Aiden understood the rules. This wasn't about hearts. This was war. And we had only just fired the first shot. The second strike had to be loud. Not subtle. Not veiled. Not a whisper behind closed doors or a secret stored on a flash drive. This one needed to be a scream in a room full of silence. A shattering, undeniable moment that would not only expose the lies they told, but destroy the illusion they'd built. Derek and Marissa were hosting a fundraiser that weekend. A charity gala of all things. Lavish. Public. Carefully orchestrated. A PR stunt, no doubt, to polish Derek's reputation and seal Marissa's place on his arm as the devoted wife. It was being held at the Crestmore Hotel ballroom, marble floors, chandeliers, press coverage. I saw the flyer online, with their faces smiling beneath the title, "The Future Starts Here." It was perfect. Aiden got me the details. He knew a guy who knew a guy, event staff, back entrance access, security schedules. I spent the week preparing. I didn't want to just show up. I wanted to arrive like a ghost breaking through the seams of their reality. Something undeniable. Something unforgettable. I bought a black gown, sleek and sharp, one Marissa would never choose for herself, too bold, too commanding. I styled my hair like I used to when Derek first met me, the version of me he once claimed to adore. I wore heels that echoed with every step. And when I looked at myself in the mirror that night, I didn't see a woman returning from the dead. I saw a reckoning. The ballroom was already full when I arrived. Glittering dresses, camera flashes, champagne flutes delicately lifted by manicured hands. The kind of crowd Derek used to mock behind closed doors before he became one of them. I moved through the space like smoke, unnoticed at first, just another dark figure at the edge of the frame. I spotted Aiden posted by the exit, arms folded, watching me with a small, approving nod. I waited until I saw them. Derek, standing tall in his navy suit, laughing with some city councilmen. Marissa at his side, dripping in emeralds, my emeralds, the ones passed down from my mother. She looked thinner, tighter, like someone living under pressure and pretending it was luxury. I stepped forward. The music lulled. A photographer raised his camera, then paused. Marissa saw me first. Her eyes widened. Her wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the tile. Conversation died. Heads turned. Gasps stirred through the crowd like wind rustling dead leaves. Derek turned last. When his eyes landed on me, the color drained from his face. He looked like a man staring into a nightmare. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stopped a few feet in front of them, the chandelier casting fractured light across my face. "Miss me?" I said. It echoed in the silence like a spell being broken. Aiden moved quickly, handing his phone to a reporter who was already reaching for her mic. Flashbulbs went off. Someone whispered, "Is that?" Another said, "She died." "That's Elena Whitmore." "She's dead." No one knew what to do. I smiled, slow and deliberate. I was declared dead. By my husband, who then married my cousin. Strange how grief works, isn't it? The press surged forward. Questions erupted like a volcano. Is this a publicity stunt? Were you in hiding? How did you survive? What do you mean declared dead? Derek's jaw clenched. Elena, this isn't the place. Oh, I think it is, I said. It's your big night, after all. Wouldn't want to miss it. Marissa looked like she might faint. Her eyes darted toward the exit, then back to me. This isn't real, she muttered. You can't be here. I get that a lot, I said. But here I am. And I have receipts. Literally. I pulled out a manila folder from my clutch and handed it to the nearest reporter. Inside were copies of my medical records, the signed death certificate, the life insurance transfer, and photographs of Marissa and Aiden in bed. Not all of them, just enough. Enough to make their blood run cold. This is going to ruin us, Derek hissed under his breath. No, I said. You ruined you. I'm just the ghost holding the mirror. I didn't stay much longer. I let the chaos bloom behind me. Security scrambled. The press circled like sharks. Derek grabbed Marissa's arm and pulled her toward the side door, but not before more flashes lit up their faces, his stunned rage, her tear-streaked panic. I walked out the front entrance like I belonged there. Because I did. I wasn't hiding anymore. They built a kingdom of lies atop my grave. And now? I'd just torn off the roof. The days after the gala moved like falling dominoes. One moment of public resurrection, and the entire foundation Derek and Marissa built began to crumble. Their faces were plastered on every news site, social feed, and gossip blog. Dead wife returns, exposes husband and cousin in shocking twist. It read like fiction. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life. And I was finally the one writing it. I didn't waste time. The morning after the gala, I walked into the police station. The woman at the front desk blinked when I gave my name. "Ma'am, you're listed as deceased." "Then I guess it's time we fix that," I said, sliding the folder across the counter. "Inside, you'll find evidence of insurance fraud, a forged death certificate, and an attempted murder disguised as a car accident." It didn't take long to get their attention. A detective met with me within the hour, face unreadable as he sorted through the documents. I gave my statement, calm and detailed, watching his pen move furiously as he tried to keep up. I told him about the sudden illness before the crash, Derek's control over my care, the withheld visits, the bank accounts, the shell company, and the affair. I gave names, dates, passwords, all of it. "Can you prove the car was sabotaged?" he asked finally. "I can prove he had motive, opportunity, and profit," I said. "And I can tell you exactly where he keeps a copy of the maintenance records, his home office drawer, bottom left. He's not as clever as he thinks." The detective gave a sharp nod. "We'll get a warrant." By the time I walked out, Derek's fate had begun to coil around his neck like a noose. And I wasn't done. Marissa tried to disappear. I expected it. She'd always been the runner. When things got hard, she vanished, friendships, jobs, even family. I found her in a hotel near the airport, booked under her mother's maiden name. It was almost pathetic how predictable she was. Aiden tracked the credit card trail, and I showed up at her door before she could flee. She opened it in a panic, wearing a silk robe and clutching her phone like a lifeline. Her eyes widened when she saw me, mascara smeared from crying. "Don't scream," I said, stepping in before she could slam the door. "If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't be knocking." Marissa backed up, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" I shut the door gently behind me. "Your help." She laughed, bitter and broken. "You destroyed us. You humiliated us in front of the entire city. I only exposed the truth. You did the rest." She didn't argue. She just collapsed onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling in her lap. "Derek's blaming me for everything. Said I put a target on our backs. He's furious." "Good," I said. "Because he's about to go down, and unless you want to join him, you're going to help me finish this." Marissa looked up slowly. "Help you? I have enough to charge him with fraud and attempted murder. But with your testimony, what you know, what you've seen, I can make sure it sticks. I know you helped him. I know you lied. But you were also manipulated. The DA might go easier on you. Or you can keep protecting a man who used both of us and let him drag you down with him." She didn't answer right away. Her lips parted like she wanted to protest, but the truth was heavy now. And undeniable. "You loved him," she whispered, eyes wet. "Once? I thought I did. But love doesn't look like graves and forged signatures." I paused. "He tried to kill me, Marissa. And he would have done the same to you when it suited him." Her shoulders sagged under the weight of it. "You really think so?" "I know so." She exhaled, then nodded. "Tell me what to do." 2 days later, Derek was arrested at his office. I didn't need to be there to see it. I watched the footage online. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfect, but his expression cracked when the cuffs went on. Betrayal. Confusion. Rage. He shouted something at the cameras, but it was garbled by the sound of shutters clicking. The press swarmed again. Marissa's statement hit the news the next morning. She detailed everything: his manipulation, their affair timeline, the money transfers, the plan. She even admitted to knowing about the falsified death certificate, though she claimed Derek coerced her into silence. I didn't know if that was true, but I didn't care. She'd done her part. Derek was denied bail. The official charges: insurance fraud, falsifying legal documents, obstruction of medical care, and attempted homicide. It wasn't over. But the mask had cracked. The man who buried me alive was finally facing the world without his lies to shield him. And I was no longer the one buried beneath his crimes. The courtroom smelled of old wood and nerves. I sat at the front, the nameplate reading Elena Whitmore in bold black letters, like a final declaration of my existence. This wasn't a ghost story anymore. This was real, tangible. The culmination of every sleepless night, every secret uncovered, every ounce of control I'd clawed back after being discarded like a worn-out page. Derek sat across the aisle, dressed sharply as always, but the confidence that once bled from him had evaporated. The lines around his mouth were deeper, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the pulse ticking in his neck. His lawyer whispered to him frequently, gesturing toward documents, exhibits, trying to steady the image. But it was useless. The evidence had already spoken louder than either of them could. I hadn't looked at him much during the trial. It took restraint, but I refused to let him steal one more second of my energy. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about justice. About truth finally having its moment in the light. I didn't need to stare him down. He knew I was there. I was the reason he wasn't sleeping. I was the reason he was fighting for freedom in a room full of strangers with pens and verdicts. Marissa hadn't shown her face in the courtroom since her testimony. She had disappeared into whatever shadow she could find, and honestly, I didn't blame her. She played her part, and now she was hiding from the very stage she helped build. Aiden had been there on the first day, offered a nod across the room. We hadn't spoken since, and I preferred it that way. We both knew our roles were complete. When the prosecution called me to the stand, I walked with deliberate calm. The sound of my heels echoed with finality, each step a reminder that I was not only alive, but unbreakable. I swore in, my hands steady, voice unwavering. I told them everything. About the symptoms that crept in like poison. The pills Derek handed me with his carefully crafted smiles. The way he dismissed my concerns, how he kept everyone away once I was in a coma. I described the grave, the death certificate, the insurance money. I walked them through the bank accounts, the shell company, the car, the one he insisted he'd taken in for repairs. And I told them what it felt like to wake up to a world that had buried me. The room was silent when I finished. No one moved. The judge didn't blink. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Not healed, but heard. Derek's lawyer tried to poke holes in my story, of course. Suggested memory could be faulty. That perhaps grief had distorted my recollection. But he was sweating by the time he sat down. He knew it was over. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. I sat in that cold wooden bench, fingers curled around the edge, as 12 strangers decided whether the man who planned my erasure would finally pay for it. When the foreperson stood and read the verdict, I barely breathed. Guilty. On all counts. The judge's voice followed like thunder. 35 years in prison. No possibility of parole for 20. Derek didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just stared straight ahead, lips pressed in a hard line, as if sheer will alone could rewrite reality. But this time, he couldn't talk his way out, couldn't seduce, couldn't lie. He turned once as the bailiff let him out, and for a flicker of a second, his eyes locked with mine. There was no hatred there, just disbelief, as though some part of him still couldn't comprehend that I'd survived. I didn't look away. He was gone. Just like that. The reporters swarmed as I exited the courthouse, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to say a word. The story had already been told. Let them speculate. Let them twist it into headlines and talk shows. Let them sell the dead wife returns tale to whoever needed drama over breakfast. I'd done what I came to do. In the weeks that followed, I reclaimed what I could, my legal identity, my bank accounts, the last threads of the life they'd tried to steal. Marissa disappeared from the public entirely. Her social media went dark. No interviews. No photos. She became what she had made of me, a ghost. But I wasn't haunting anymore. I was moving on. And the world finally remembered my name. The coastal town I moved to wasn't on any of the maps I used to keep in the glove compartment of my old car. It wasn't marked by flashy attractions or fancy restaurants. Just cliffs that dropped into the sea, crooked cottages with wind-worn shutters, and the scent of salt clinging to everything. It was quiet, raw, real. No one knew me here. No one whispered when I walked by. No one saw a headline when they looked at my face. And that was the point. I rented a small cottage on a bluff overlooking the water. It had peeling paint, creaky floorboards, and a fireplace that smoked if I wasn't careful, but it was mine. Every corner felt honest. I filled it with secondhand furniture and warm blankets, nothing matching, everything chosen by me for me. I woke up each morning to the gulls shrieking overhead and the sound of waves kissing the rocks, and for the first time in years, I breathed without fear. No hidden cameras, no pills I didn't recognize, no curated life built around someone else's deception. I started writing again. It began as notes in the margins of a worn notebook, just scattered thoughts at first, memories, reflections, unfinished sentences. But it grew. The more I wrote, the more I realized the story wasn't just mine. It was a warning, a resurrection, a declaration that survival wasn't enough. You had to reclaim the pieces of yourself that betrayal tried to shatter. I titled it I Was Declared Dead. Aiden put me in touch with a literary agent he knew from his days trying to sell a screenplay. She read the manuscript in one night. Called me the next morning, speechless. "Elena," she said, "this isn't just a memoir. It's a revolution." The book deal came fast. Too fast. Part of me flinched at the idea of going public again, but this time, it was on my terms. My face, my words, my truth. I didn't owe silence to anyone. Not to Derek. Not to Marissa. And definitely not to the world that once accepted my death without question. When the book launched, it spread like wildfire. Readers called it brave, haunting, empowering. I got letters from women who'd escaped toxic marriages, who'd been gaslit, silenced, made invisible. Survivors who told me they finally felt seen. And slowly, I began to believe what they were saying, that I wasn't just the sum of what had been done to me. I was what I chose to become after. I walked the beach each evening just before sunset, the horizon melting in a palette of soft orange and bruised violet. I'd take off my shoes and let the cold water lap at my ankles, grounding me. This ocean had never heard Derek's name. It didn't care who Marissa had been. It only knew the woman standing in its surf now. Sometimes I thought about them, fleeting thoughts that drifted in like the tide and receded just as quickly. Derek, locked away behind cold metal bars, his charm now useless. Marissa, living in the shadows of shame and exile. I didn't hate them anymore. That feeling had burnt out somewhere between the courthouse steps and the first night I slept without looking over my shoulder. I didn't forgive them. But I no longer carried the weight of what they did like it belonged to me. One night, as the sea frothed and hissed beneath the cliffs, I brought a bottle of wine and my journal out to the edge of the bluff. The wind tugged at my sweater, my hair whipping around my face, but I didn't move. I let it wrap around me, this wild, living world I'd chosen. I opened the journal to the last page. There was nothing more to write. I looked up at the stars breaking through the dusk and whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry it into the darkness, "Let's see who really died." Not me. I was the woman who refused to die. The one who crawled out of a grave they dug with greed and lies and built something better from the wreckage. I was the consequence. The truth. The survivor. And now I was free.